I want to be very clear with you from the beginning. This is not about how to live an individually green life, how to compost, how to recycle, change your diet, fly less, drive an electric car. Lots of other people can come along, I'm hoping, in the future with the Rotary and talk about that. I'm taking a macro view of the global economy now and the role of business in the environmental crisis and hopefully in the solution going forward. So let me just start with a few slides about why the world faces such a great environmental challenge together with the well-being COVID challenge that we're all living through today. And I'm going to make a big point to start off with, that we're coming to the end of a 40-year stable period of capitalism. Between 1980 and 2020, businesses innovated, businesses came, businesses went, but within reason, we've lived through a period of quite light regulation, quite light tax for business. And in return, businesses created jobs, GDP growth, and lifted a lot of people in many parts of the world out of extreme poverty. But it's not been without consequence, whether that's social challenges that we face, and we see with populism across the planet at the moment, well-being challenges, environmental challenges I'm going to really focus on today, and the technology revolution that's really starting to upend business. But 2020 has been a pivot point where we start to form a new, quite rapidly a new marketplace. And again, sustainability in the environment has to be at the heart of that new marketplace going forward. So let me just sort of explain why we face so many concerns about the planet. I'm not going to labour this. It demands an hour, 2 hours of lecture in itself. You're not going to get that in 5 or 10 minutes. You've probably seen that 2020 has just been recorded as the joint warmest year on record, the last 100, 120 years. You can see quite starkly from this graph how rapidly temperatures have been rising over the last 20 or 30 years. Another little picture here from April 2020, less than 12 months ago, showing how the world is starting to shift away from the long-term average. And again, look at the top of the world there, the Arctic. You might think the Arctic's far from our lives. The Arctic generates the weather patterns we get in the Northern Hemisphere. So if things go wrong in the Arctic, as they are doing, diminishing sea ice, rising temperatures, it drives weather extremes for us, whether it's extreme heat or extreme cold. We all live off what's happening in the Arctic. Now, this is just a very simple graph, and it's saying that we're on a trajectory at the moment to see about 3 to 3.5 degrees of warming on the planet. Now, what the heck does 3.5 degrees of warming mean? It's the difference between the temperature at 9 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock. Well, let me just put it in context. About 10,000 years ago, the global average temperature was about 6 degrees colder than now. It was the Ice Age, and much of the British Isles was covered by 1,000 meters of ice. That's 6 degrees on average colder. We're heading towards 3.5 degrees warmer. What might that look? Not least because there's now 7.7 billion people on the planet living a precarious life, just in time, as we've seen with recent shocks to the economic system we all rely on, how quickly things can grind to a halt. 3.5 degrees of warming, believe me, it's not worth contemplating. If the world pulls its finger out, we might keep warming to around 2 degrees. Still very significant impact on our lives. So climate change is happening, be very clear about that. And again, it's happening close to home. I talk about the Arctic. I think last year during lockdown, the start of lockdown, we saw the wettest ever February. By April and May, we've seen the warmest ever months, or driest ever months on record in the UK. I think RF Benson, close to us in May, recorded at most 1 millimetre of rain in a whole month. So we are seeing weather extremes on our own doorstep. Flood warnings in the north of England tonight, as again, another weather system blows in from the Atlantic, again, putting people's lives at risk and certainly their livelihoods impact as well, all at the height of the pandemic. Now, I'm going to stop the science in a moment. This is just a reminder of the world's key carbon dioxide emitters. That's what causes the climate crisis that we are stepping into. Very clearly, China, the biggest emitter now, States second, the EU as a whole somewhat behind. The UK actually, if you probably take it out of the EU figure, is doing pretty well. It's a figure that's off the bottom of that graph now, reduced from about 750,000 tons, megatons per year, million tons per year, to less than 500. So the UK has done fairly well so far on decarbonising. Now, this is not just a crisis of climate. There's one of plastics as well. And again, the world is using more and more plastics every year. 8 million tons a year getting into the oceans. I think Attenborough very starkly showed us that through Blue Planet 2. 8 million tons might not seem much, but plastic doesn't weigh much. it's increasingly populating the oceans and the animals that live it, the fish that we ultimately eat. Trillions and trillions of small items of plastic added to the oceans every year. And there's a bigger crisis behind all of that, and that's biodiversity. And I love this sort of picture from Jenga, for those of you who played with the kids. So when you were a kid, pulling the wooden building blocks out of the tower until it all tipples over. Top of the Jenga column is us, our society, our economy, and we depend on the birds and the bees and everything else that underpins them to keep our life going as it is. And all the time we're pulling them away, we're destroying habitats, we're destroying ecosystems. I think animal populations on the planet are down by 68% in less than 50 years, according to the WWF. 1 million species at risk of extinction, largely because of the way that we live our life, over-consuming, as we'll talk about in a minute. So all the time we're pulling away the building blocks of our society and our future. Crazy. So climate change, plastics, biodiversity loss, there's an awful lot of problem out there. Now I want to pivot to what's causing that. And I'm indebted to Tony Juniper, now the chair of Natural England, was the chief executive of Friends of the Earth, for the next few slides. And what Tony's done, along the bottom, you won't be able to see the numbers, but it's just data lapse, a couple of 100 years along the bottom, and up the vertical axis is the world population. And you can see over the last 100 years, no surprises, it's pushed on very, very rapidly, 7.7 billion people on the planet today. That's brought an expansion of economic activity. Again, let's not dwell on the numbers. It's the shape that I'm trying to show you. The world GDP has increased fourfold, fivefold of the last few decades. Again, brought a lot of benefit to a lot of people, but also fueled a lot of the environmental problems we're causing. And that's because we, 7.7 billion people or less, you know, it's the few billion people who live in the developed West who are driving this, are consuming an awful lot of stuff. And I'll share those numbers with you in a minute. But there's roughly 100 billion tons of stuff consumed on the planet, taken out of nature every year. Less than 8% of that is getting recycled or reused in any meaningful form. We're just taking more and more out. And as I'll show you in a minute, that's all lies at the heart of what we as individuals consume. Here are a few stats. I mean, before COVID, last year, the world, or 2019, the world consumed 130 billion pieces of clothing, footwear around the world, 3 billion in the UK. Every time we wash and dry clothing, it gives off tiny microplastics swept into the ocean through sewage works. That's the equivalent of putting 50 billion plastic bottles per year in the oceans just coming off our clothing. 120 billion pieces of packaging for beauty products. The world's largest fizzy drink company serving 700 billion servings of its drinks every year. And you can read the stats that go on. And perhaps most troubling on there, in a world that's struggling with food poverty, even in the UK, we're struggling with food poverty. Yet a third of all food that's produced on the planet never reaches a human mouth. 500 calories per day per person on the planet, when 750 million people are going to bed hungry every night. It's crazy. So we live in a world where we overconsume, and it's incredibly wasteful as well. And what drives that, as I've mentioned already, is our Western lifestyles. I mean, if everybody in the world lived as an Australian did, we'd need 5 worlds to fulfill everybody's consuming as we do here in the West. Same with the States. You can see the numbers: South Korea, Russia. UK would need 3 planets to support all the needs of all the people on the planet if everybody lived like us. So, of course, it's a population issue here. 7.7 billion people on the planet. We've got to think about some birth control and how we control population. But it's predominantly an issue of consumption, the way that we do it profligately in our lifestyles now. So I'm going to pause there and just remind us of 2 things that we've discussed. What is the environmental crisis that we're living through? And it lies very much at the door of business and consumption. That yes, as we as individuals participate in, and we have a responsibility, which I'll come back to, but business needs to be one that steps forward and corrects the system that we've got today. So if that's the problem, what's the solution? Now, I want to focus the next 15 minutes or so on what we do to solve the problem. I'm going to talk about citizens, 7.7 billion people on the planet. Where are their heads at on this environmental crisis and solving it? I'm going to talk about investors. I'm going to talk about the corporate response, startups, disruptors as well. And we'll talk about the policy system briefly. So let's start with citizens. Now, over Christmas, lucky me, during lockdown, I read through 140 different surveys from around the world about how citizens feel about environmental issues and the impact of their consumption habits. I've done it so you don't have to. I whittled it down to a few slides and a few bullet points to remember. And here are the 7 questions I'm going to try and answer in the next few moments. Do people really care about social and environmental issues? Do they want a big response to the crises we've got, or an incremental one? Has COVID impacted how they think and feel? Do they associate their personal consumption habits with the big global crises we're talking about? Are they willing to change? Do younger people care more? And is this a North European preoccupation and no one else in the world is interested? Let me just touch very briefly on those points. Now, the first thing is, reading through all those surveys, consistently in virtually every marketplace in the world, 70% of people are saying, I am worried about the state of the environment, particularly climate change. And the reason is very obvious. It's really clear to people. Here are the wildfires in California, dramatic increase over the last few years. But whether it's flooding in Bangladesh or India, wildfires in Australia, floods in the southern United States, people are seeing the reality of the climate crisis. It's no longer a theory, it's impacting them. So typically 70% of people in any society have a great concern. The second thing, let's ask people if they actually want to do something about change. And again, consistently, about 50 to 60% of people are saying, we recognize that we need to change our lifestyles substantially to respond to this. Even in the States, 50 to 60% of people are saying, we can't respond to the climate crisis using today's approach to capitalism. When we ask people if we want to recover from COVID with economic stimulus that puts environment at the heart of that stimulus, again, 60% of people are saying, yeah, I do. When we ask the number of people that want to just do economic regrowth and nothing to do with the environment, it's less than 30%. So a very substantial number of people want a better future, build back better. Then let's ask ourselves the COVID question. Again, just seen a big survey come out of Moray, 28,000 people around the world. Does the climate crisis get pushed to one side by COVID? Well, on average, 71% of people are saying no, they both matter equally. In fact, in China, 87% of people say that the climate crisis is a bigger deal. It's a bigger problem than COVID to solve. So again, COVID has not moved the dial in terms of people's long-term concerns or interests. Now, increasingly, as I say, people are seeing the impacts. This is air pollution in Delhi. This is a plastic kitchen here in the West after you've unpacked all your food. But people are also seeing more and more information about the impact of their product that they're buying. Great example from Quorn, talking about the carbon footprint of the product they sell. And more businesses are going to put those footprints on the side of their product saying, buy this, but be aware of what you're buying and the impact that comes with it. And again, this is the life cycle assessment of the carbon footprint of coffee. If you have black coffee, no milk, it's going to have less impact. If you replace your milk with a more sustainable alternative to dairy milk, less impact. If you get your coffee from a more sustainable source, well managed, not cutting down a rainforest, it has a lower impact. People are beginning to understand these impacts. Now, let me just quickly turn our attention to a generational issue, and I can say this as a man of a certain age. Again, all the research I've looked through on your behalf says most parts of society, whatever age group or demographic we're talking about, care about the same. Typically, women care more than men, not by a huge amount, but typically. But the difference comes for younger generations, people under 30, under 40, who are more willing to act upon those concerns. So my generation are concerned and worried and says something needs to be done by business or government. The younger generation gets off its backside, it marches in the streets, it starts new businesses that are truly sustainable, it lobbies for change in government circles. So they're much more activist, and they expect the same off the businesses that they buy from and they shop with and they work with. Now, the final question I set myself was, does it just sort of matter in Northern Europe and no one else really cares because they're sort of trying to get up the development ladder and get all the things we take for granted? And if you look on the right, the seriousness of climate change, you'll see that the people that are actually taking this most seriously are often in the developing world or the semi-developed, so Mexico, Turkey, South Africa, Vietnam in there, Argentina, Brazil. And that's because if you look at the left-hand side, typically they're seeing more and more impact in their lives, with more impact because they're living in a poorer economy that can't adapt quickly enough to extreme weather events, whether it's heat or rain. So people around the world, if anything, there's even more concern in many ways outside Europe in terms of the challenge. So that's citizens. People want change of business, and businesses don't respond, won't be relevant and won't be around in the future. Now, lots of people say to me, Mike, the evidence still isn't there. Really, is the real proof that people want change? Surely they're worried about the economy and recession and losing the jobs and COVID. Of course, that's the case. But I use these two quotes always. Wayne Gretzky, the famous Canadian ice hockey player, probably the greatest ever. Why are you so great, Wayne? Because I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it's been. And the puck, in terms of citizens' concern about the environment, is only going to grow. Business needs to be skating to where the consumer's going, or the citizens are going, heightened awareness and concern and expectation. And the old Henry Fordism you've probably heard, if I'd listened exactly to my consumer, I'd have given them a faster horse. People are saying I'm concerned about the planet. I don't know exactly what I want to replace my iPhone with, or my fizzy drink with, or my current unsustainable red meat with. You work it out, but I do want something different. So that's the citizen. Ignore them at your peril. The next thing I'm going to talk about briefly is the marketplace. And again, many of the problems that we talk about lie deep, deep in supply chains, distant from your life. So you hear about the impact of a meat-based diet. Now, some of that's the cow is belching and farting in the field. Some of it's also where the animal feed comes from. If it comes from the Amazon, from chopping down rainforest to grow soy, to feed the animals so we can eat it, huge impact on the environment. How can you possibly know that as the consumer picking up your piece of red meat from the supermarket, or your biscuits that have got palm oil in? You need business to take responsibility for those impacts for you. This is just a bit of research that's been done about the relative carbon footprint of different products. You can see there's quite a wide average there. Look at beef at the top. It gets a bad name for itself, but beef can be done well. And in some ways, beef could be part of a better future for people if it's grown and produced to much higher standards than today. And typically, British beef is relatively good compared to much of the rest of the world. But a vegetarian, vegan diet, there's no two ways about it, has much less impact if that's a route that you want to go. Now, transparency is coming to the marketplace. This is just a snapshot from my old world of the supermarkets. They're benchmarked all the time. On the left by Oxfam in terms of human rights, on the right by Greenpeace in terms of plastics. I've seen 16 different surveys like this. They have different leaders. It comes and goes. The key thing is transparency is coming in. It's coming into other sectors, so you can decide where you shop in the future. And crucially, the supermarkets respond to this. None of them like to be bottom. Inevitably, when this comes out, somebody's bottom, the race to move up the market, up the league table. You might never know as the consumer, but putting things right behind the scenes. So transparency is entering the marketplace in every sector, not just retail. Here are just a few little vignettes. I'm not going to dwell on this. We haven't got time. Famous tech companies here, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, locked in an existential race to appear to be the world's best environment and do some really good stuff, setting big, broad goals to drive down their carbon emissions, increase recycling of their equipment. It's a good start. I've got a lot of challenge for them on social sustainability, spreading hate, undermining democracy. Where do they pay their taxes? How do they hold data? But environmentally, they're really pushing an agenda now. I'll talk about L'Oreal, Garnier brand a little bit. Unilever, very famous in this space. I've just done some work with them where they're taking 1 million tons per annum of oil out of their home care products. So all those Domestos Cif cleaning bleachers that you're buying to keep you going through the pandemic, oil-based, not just for Unilever, for every business out there. Hidden oil. So we're taking oil out of the car industry and shift to electric, but it's hiding all those consumer products. Unilever are taking oil out of all their products. Upfield, Unilever's old Flora business, is now putting carbon labels on 100 million packs of Flora from this year onwards. So again, you can understand the carbon footprint of the product you're buying. So all around us, businesses, even PwC that doesn't sell products to you and me, professional services, is committing to work with its clients to advise them on the low carbon journey as well. So across all the incumbent businesses now, we're starting to see a response, And here are 4 little practical stories. IKEA's just opened its first second-hand store in Sweden. Doesn't sell anything new. You take your stuff back from IKEA that you finish with, they might refurbish it, give it a paint job, resell it. Cheaper for you to buy, doesn't get thrown away. The app showing there is Garnier, L'Oreal's brand, hair conditioners, shampoos, digital app that tells you A to E how good their brands are in terms of environment. Bottom left corner is a picture from an M&S shop growing salad leaf in the store. Fresher for you. You can see where it's grown, much less impact on the environment. And the other example down there is an American restaurant chain that's helping people understand the carbon footprint of each individual ingredient in the product they're buying from them. So innovation is happening out there in the business world. It's all over the business press, the Financial Times, Time, the Economist magazine, the journals of choice of business leaders, all talking about the climate crisis and the need to respond to it. But the true challenge and opportunity in business now is disruption. It's not about getting 2 or 3 or 4% less bad every year. It's fundamentally changing your business model. So 3 examples. Rethink X, a think tank, have done a very, very provocative report to say that 50% of the US beef industry is going to get wiped out, not by a switch to a plant-based diet, that'll be a little bit nibble, but it'll be a point at which protein alternatives are fermented in laboratories. You only need a herd of 100 cattle to feed the whole planet with fermented meat from the lab using stem cells, because it will be cheaper. Not just better quality, better for the environment, better clearly for the animal, but it'll be cheaper. And as soon as it becomes cheaper, it becomes the thing that people rush to. It's provocative, it might not happen quite like they think, but disruption's coming to the food industry. Same with the fashion industry. I talked about 130 billion garments a year being sold in 2019, very few of which are recycled. Now we've got the rise of the resale platforms, the Depops, the ThreadUps, the Vestiaire collectives. People aren't just throwing clothing away, they're reselling it when they're finished with it. Better for them economically, better for the environment, second, third, fourth life. And then the graphs at the bottom, the rise of the electric vehicle. For a decade, I watched the car companies, the diesel, petrol car companies laugh at electric vehicles. It's ugly, poor performance, difficult to recharge, expensive, never take off. Now they're being destroyed by it. So every industrial sector in the world is going to get disrupted by sustainability, not just a little, but profoundly. If you're on the wrong side of it, you lose, and you lose a lot. I'm not going to go all through all these guys in these 2 slides. These are the sustainability startups. You see the word Tesla up there, worth $500 billion now. And again, until 3 years ago, people were laughing at Tesla. It'll never take on GM or Ford or VW. Now it's worth more than all of them put together. Indigo Ag, worth over $1 billion. It's created a marketplace for farmers to farm carbon, lock it out of the atmosphere, and you pay farmers for keeping it in their soil through good practice. Allbirds, fantastically comfortable trainer, pretty stylish, sustainably produced, worth $2 billion a year now. And I could go on, Oatly worth $5 billion, milk alternative. All around us, a new economy is rising. Again, a few examples here. Mindful Chef, meal kit business just bought by Nestle. Just, which has just brought this fermented meat for the first time to the marketplace in Singapore, where it's just been approved. It'll be soon to be global. Appeal Sciences putting a coating on fruits to give it extra life. You can eat it, it's edible, but it stops the food going from waste. The 30% of food I was talking about going to waste every year, Appeal are solving that. They're just a few examples. I've got a database of over 1,000 disruptive companies on there using sustainability to grow their business. And fundamentally, what they're offering the consumer, the people I've just mentioned, is better products. Tesla is a super stylish, aspirational, high-performance car. Memphis Meats, beautiful tasting meat alternative. Allbirds, super stylish alternative to the big trainer companies, unsustainable. They are making something that's better for the consumer, better for the planet as well. Now, what's driving a lot of this behind the scenes is innovation in price. This is what's happened in the marketplace in terms of the price of batteries for electric vehicles. 10 years ago, it's off the scale, $1,100 per battery pack. Once it gets to $100 per kilowatt hour, you're going to get to a point where it's on parity with internal combustion engine. At the current run rate, it's going to be about 2023, 2024. As soon as it becomes cheaper and the charging network out there, internal combustion engine collapses. So again, the price is being driven down of these alternatives all the time. Now, briefly on investors. Again, I'm not going to run through all these points. I've spent 20 years in business where most investors didn't give a monkeys about these issues, no interest whatsoever. Now, a little bit grudgingly initially, they've been forced to. National governments are saying we're going to decarbonize our economy. Therefore, you've got to do this. NGOs are starting to shine the spotlight on them as much as Tesco's and Asda. A little report came out from Share Action, a really good campaign group year, looked at 75 of the world's biggest asset owners. They own, I think, over $50 trillion worth of assets around the world, and ranked them A to E in terms of their approach to sustainability. You can see the numbers there. Over 50% of them got a D or an E grade for their approach to environment. They're improving, trying to improve behind the scenes rapidly. So all around us, the investment community are starting to take this seriously. Again, the word start. Two or three stories from the last few weeks. I like the story about ExxonMobil. It's been under huge pressure to disclose what it's called its Scope 3 carbon footprint. Not just running its oil refineries, which it already told us about, but extracting the oil and then its customers using that oil. When you actually look at its emissions, they're on a par with Canada's. So one company, ExxonMobil, is responsible for the same amount of emissions on the planet as a nation of Canada. Then you begin to understand how big these businesses are and how much responsibility they need to take. Now, this is the killer stat for any investor. These are two graphs showing the relative economic or valuation on the stock market of ExxonMobil and NextEra, the USA's biggest renewable energy company. And in Europe, Ørsted, the world's biggest wind farm business, and BP, great leader of the oil and gas age. Now, back in 2010, ExxonMobil was the world's most valuable company, bar none. Not Apple's, not Amazon's, not Microsoft. It was Exxon. No one had ever heard of NextEra. Today, NextEra is worth more than ExxonMobil. Same you can see happening to BP, not being quite caught up yet by Ørsted. It'll happen soon. And that's because shareholders are at last recognizing that if they don't respond to these trends, they lose billions. If they do respond to them early, they make billions. This is the killer graph. So that's the investor system. So we've talked about citizens, we've talked about the marketplace, we've talked about investors. Let's just finish off talking about the policy system. Yeah, it's been tough for policymakers in 2010. They've been dealing with, 2020, they've been dealing with COVID, Brexit, Trump, all these things going on. But here are a few reasons to be optimistic about 2021. Prince Charles has just launched something called Terra Carta, to sort of mirror the Magna Carta from 800 years ago, talking about society and businesses' responsibility to the planet. Glasgow is hosting the world's key climate conference, something called COP26, where hopefully governments will step forward with really ambitious plans to decarbonise. We've got a big biodiversity conference in China in May. We've got the UN Sustainable Development Goals as well. So all around us, and of course, we've got the shift in America with the Biden administration, will rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, turn up at COP26 in Glasgow with an ambitious plan to decarbonise as well, which spurs and drives change amongst American businesses. In the UK, again, whatever your political view can be, ever since 2008 and the Climate Change Act in the UK, so across different political administrations, the UK has been a world leader on climate change. The Committee on Climate Change has done a brilliant job at coming up with independent 5-year carbon budgets. The 6th came out just before Christmas. Have a look at it if you're interested. Really powerful piece of work by its chief exec, Chris Stark. And the Prime Minister launched a 10-point decarbonisation plan before Christmas, talking about not selling new diesel and petrol cars from 2030. Only 9 years away. Think about it. You can't buy a new petrol and diesel car within 9 years. So the UK policy system is driving change as well. So citizens want it. The marketplace is innovating. Investors are demanding change. Government and policymakers are driving change as well. Business has to respond. And when the policy system works, we become a world leader. We've seen it with wind turbines, offshore wind. The UK is a world leader. New farms, wind farms going up in the North Sea that will power between 3 and 5 million homes each. Just think about the scale of that. The world's biggest wind turbines are going to be going up in the North Sea, 853 feet high, nearly as tall as the Eiffel Tower, to get a feel for the scale of these things. They cover several hundred square kilometres each of the North Sea. And all that's been possible because the UK government brought long-term policy in, long-term financial incentives initially to get the marketplace rolling. Business innovated, as we saw with the graph on battery prices of cars. The same has happened with the price of wind turbines per kilowatt hour generated. Down it's come as people have scaled up to create these monster turbines. Another policy intervention made a huge difference. China was the dumping ground for the world's plastic. We thought our plastic collected in across the UK was being recycled in the UK. No, it wasn't. It was gone on a boat to China, where some of it was being recycled, most of it was being burnt, chucked in a hole in the ground, or let go into the rivers. China rightly turned around 2 years ago and said, Project Sword, not taking it anymore. The Western world is now scrabbling around building its own plastics recycling infrastructure. Good. That's what good policy does. It didn't overly micromanage how you should do it. but it forced business to change. And here's just sort of 3 thoughts on what business needs to, or the policy system needs to do to get business to do even more. There's something called TCFD. I won't go into the details of it at this stage. It's driving carbon disclosure. Businesses now have to put a report out there. Big businesses say this is my carbon footprint, what I'm doing to reduce it, next to your economic financial report as well. Science-based targets, that's now an approved system that said, if you as a business say you want to reduce your carbon emissions, you've got to have it signed off and approved in the way that almost like auditors do your financial results. You've got to prove that you're doing it. And zero carbon commissions, a campaign for a price on carbon. I'm a great believer, just put a price on carbon pollution. Those that pollute pay a price, a penalty, they're forced out of the marketplace. Those that innovate and don't pollute benefit. So that's been a whistle-stop tour. I'm going to sort of conclude over the next two minutes. As I say, citizens, innovation in the marketplace, investors and the policy system, all driving business to change. Remember where I started. Hopefully a really scary set of slides to say the world's going to hell in a handcart at the moment in terms of environmental damage. Business is right at the heart of that. Everything I've just shared with you over the last 15, 20 minutes is a beginning, not an end. You as individuals, what can you do? You can encourage in terms of how you shop, how you bank, the decisions you make about your own consumption approaches. You can lobby government. And there's something called the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill doing the rounds in the UK Parliament at the moment. People say, why do we need another piece of climate change legislation when we're doing pretty good? What the CEE bill does, it puts consumption and our overseas footprint at the heart of what we as a nation need to do, rather than just say, that's China's problem, even though we're going to consume the stuff here, we hope the Chinese are going to do something about it. The CEE bill forces us to take responsibility for our global consumption footprint. So these are just 2 little things to think about as we wrap up. I particularly like the thing on the left, which is the Patagonia advert from just before Christmas. You read it down, but then you read it back up. So do that in your own time as I sort of wrap up. I fundamentally believe, as a business leader, I've been in this space now for 20 odd years, business has got its fingerprints all over the crises that we're living today. There's no 2 ways about it. Business needs to change. But for the first time in those 20 years, I can see a pathway from a bad place to a good place if we keep the right incentives and drive going for business. So that's enough from Mike. I'm going to pass the floor back to the Rotary team and look forward to any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.